Did you guys have any questions about the reoccupation of the Rhineland? Where we had, so the reoccupation of the Rhineland, 1936, the spring of 1936, and in the fall of 1936, the Rome-Berlin Axis, the Pact of Steel, formally brings together Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler, and the idea is that they're the powers on the axis of Europe. This is formally signed on October 25th, 1936. Japan will later join the two. The alliance held for the first few years of the war. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Basically, the Italian military action in North Africa pulls the Nazi Africa Corps, led by Erwin Rommel, into North Africa, that thins out the Nazis' forces, not to mention Nazi forces moving into Italy and Greece as well. So we'll get into that a bit later. Ultimately, there will be an Allied invasion of Italy, and Italy will come to the side after the death of Mussolini, and the Allied invasion of Rome will come to the side of the Allies. I'm getting way ahead of where we need to be today, though. So this then leads to the Nazis' next move toward annexation. Keep in mind, the military buildup continues. In March of 1938, there was a rigged election in Austria, and what Hitler is promoting is the Anschluss, the idea that the Austrian people would be united with Germany again. Not everybody was in favor of that. Certainly members of the Austrian government and the Austrian leader, Wilhelm Miklos, was appealing to Britain and France and Italy for aid. Obviously, Italy by this time is a ally of Nazi Germany. They've already launched their invasion of Ethiopia. They've got their sights set on parts of North Africa, notably Libya, and Libya to tighten the reins on potential invasion, which we're going to talk about later, of Egypt. This is still the era of appeasement. Britain and France aren't going to come in to provide any type of aid, and Hitler promises that after the Anschluss that will be the end of the expansion. There won't be a risk of war, so the other countries don't do anything to stop this invasion. So this is, again, one more part of the appeasement policy. Obviously, Hitler doesn't keep his word. 6 months later, he demands the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia. This is all of the sort of the land that wraps around the northwestern and southwestern portions of Czechoslovakia. So he's not even asking for all of Czechoslovakia at this point. Neville Chamberlain will meet with Hitler 3 times in September of 1938. They'll reach an agreement to prevent war. So Hitler will now set his sights on Czechoslovakia. In March of 1939, Hitler moves into Czechoslovakia despite calls for help from Emil Hacha, the Czechoslovakian leader, and the Czechoslovakian government. Again, another step toward appeasement and no military action against Hitler. We talked a bit about this in the last class. Keep in mind the British and French military forces are spread out pretty thin, from their own defenses all the way through their colonies that are held in North Africa out to India and in the South Pacific. Here we have the Germans, the members of the Wehrmacht, removing the gate the gates that at the border of Czechoslovakia on the left. This is a parade, Nazi parades into Czechoslovakia. And then on the right there, this is a pretty iconic image of Czechoslovakian woman with tears in her eyes saluting Hitler during one of the Nazi parades, or at least saluting the Wehrmacht as they marched into her city in Czechoslovakia. So do keep in mind there's other treaties that, and maybe you already looked at the lesson before. I actually decided to slide the treaties around to where they kind of went timeline-wise. So this is I probably should have pulled this a little bit earlier. These treaties occurred in the early 30s with Hitler, treaties with Hungary, and then later Slovakia. So these are trade treaties, appeasement treaties as well that the British and the French allow for. So the Hungarian treaty is mainly a trade treaty to pull them out of the Depressionary era. But that's ultimately going to pull them into the war. The Slovakian agreement is going to sort of be a false promise for autonomy from the Czechoslovakian people, and this is also a pretty sad moment of irony in the war, because many of the victims of the Holocaust are going to be Slavic people that would have backed Hitler early on, because as early as 1938, 39, with these invasions, Jews, undesirables, gypsies, and anybody that seemed like a potential enemy of the state would have been rounded up and either executed by the Eisengruppen SS forces led by Himmler, or they would have been sent to labor and concentration camps that are being established. Do keep in mind that any of these occupied territories, labor camps, concentration camps are being built, and not all labor camps and concentration camps are on a large scale like Dachau or Auschwitz, right? We're talking about small labor camps in remote locations. There were thousands of labor camps and concentration camps. We just sort of remember, like, you know, Dachau and Auschwitz because they were so large and they were large-scale execution, extermination camps, but these camps were being built all over the place. So that takes us to some interesting propaganda. I've got a couple of propaganda posters here. This is pro-Nazi Hungarian propaganda on the left, and pro-Nazi propaganda on the right that would have been distributed in parts of Czechoslovakia. So on the left we have this sort of I mean, this is really sad. What this is sort of depicting is they're basically depicting a Jewish man stealing your money, your rings, with the briefcase under arm. You got Soviet red star with the hammer and sickle on the lapel, the British hat, and the American Uncle Sam type suit. And then the other piece of propaganda is sort of like the propaganda to kind of play on, like, oh yeah, you know, the Nazis are providing labor and food and welfare.
The image on the left, that's French.
Yeah, but no, that particular poster was a poster that was in Hungary. Yeah.
I don't think many Hungarians can read French.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm just, that was a particular piece of, like, a propaganda poster that was located there, yeah. Well, it's anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
It's to promote, like, essentially not the Holocaust, but because that would have been, it was essentially the rehabilitation of Jews, meaning moving them in, to support the moving of them into labor camps and concentration camps. Like, that's the whole propaganda piece. Like, if we boycott the Jews and we move them into these camps, they can be rehabilitated and they can become, upstanding people, and they can become, a part of not a part of the Third Reich, but, a part of the labor system. But in reality, I mean, that's like if you look at the signs outside of camps like Auschwitz, Arbeit macht frei, with work comes freedom, right? So even the propagandas on the signs walking into the camps, like, oh, these people are working to gain their freedom, they're becoming rehabilitated. I'm not quite, I honestly can't answer why it would have been in French, but that is a piece of propaganda that is a piece of propaganda that existed in Hungary. So I'm not quite sure. It also may have been a piece of propaganda that had been produced in Vichy, France, which would have been the southern portion of France that was under the Nazi puppet state that we'll talk about a bit later. Are you all familiar with that?
Yeah.
The Vichy movement led by Pétain. He was basically a puppet set up by Hitler, who that was actually everything in France was like occupied, right? But this portion of southern France was actually, they were Nazi supporters. So that I'll double check. That could have been where it would have been produced.
Right.
It could have just been produced by the Nazi propaganda machine by Goebbels and could have just been distributed. But that I actually pulled that. I try to pull the pieces of propaganda connected to where they were, so I'll double check that for you guys. So the Munich conference, here we have Hitler and Chamberlain. Ribbentrop, which is Hitler's foreign minister. And the idea of the Munich conference is to prevent any more aggression beyond the invasion of Czechoslovakia. This is one of those revisionist histories where people sort of look at Chamberlain as being weak because of appeasement, but a lot of historians are starting to give Neville Chamberlain a bit more credit in recent years. I would actually even say months. In fact, there was a podcast on NPR that there's a British author and a couple of American historians who are trying to rewrite the history of Neville Chamberlain. And essentially what they're saying is that Munich was as uncomfortable for Neville Chamberlain was as uncomfortable for Hitler as it was Neville Chamberlain, because even though Hitler was sort of publicly saying our enemies are worms, they're a joke, they're not prepared to fight us. The Munich Pact, or the Munich Conference, sort of was like, Hitler knew that this was like the line in the sand, that it was going to, by breaking this, it was ultimately going to lead to war. Another part about this too that I thought was kind of interesting is that this group of historians have brought up the fact that this was also a colossal inconvenience to Hitler. The fact that he had to, Hitler had already left the League not long after taking control of Germany. He had sort of turned his back on any type of previous alliances or agreements that he had signed with any of the former allies, or loose agreements like a naval plan that he had signed with the British. So I don't know. I mean, I see where they're coming from. It's kind of hard to dispute the fact that this is yet another pact for appeasement. However, this pact is formed on September 29th, 30th, 1938. Does Chamberlain really believe that Hitler won't keep expanding? I doubt it. I think that we know historically that England is now and France are starting to prepare and mobilize by this time. They haven't really have no choice. Part of this pact was to agree upon the sovereignty of Poland, to make sure that it would be protected. There was obviously rumors that Western Poland to Warsaw would be, there would be an attempt to have that be part of the appeasement and regained by Germany, because much of the western borders, especially northwest of Prussia and western, pushed up against, I'll have a map for you, but eastern Prussia would have been German-speaking people. So what this Munich Agreement becomes is the Anglo-German Declaration. Neville Chamberlain will call it Peace for Our Time. And I have a clip we're going to take a look at here in a bit where Neville Chamberlain gives the Peace in Our Time speech. Actually have the speech. I'm going to show you the speech, the film clip of the speech on the right. And I'm also going to show you the film clip of Neville Chamberlain declaring war following the invasion of Poland. So here we have Neville Chamberlain and the Anglo-German Declaration. So it's formally signed on September 29th. Chamberlain has his press conference on the 30th. That leads us now to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, or the Russo-German Non-Aggression Pact. So Ribbentrop had met with Stalin and Molotov. Ribbentrop is the foreign minister for Hitler, Molotov, foreign minister for Stalin. So this is a really bizarre treaty. They're obviously enemies. They don't agree philosophically, politically. And on August 23rd, 1939, this is one of the most shocking agreements that was inked by the Nazis in the pre-war era. And we're just weeks away from the start of World War II. So the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact basically is a treaty that says Russia and the Nazis will not seek aggression against one another. However, they will work together to launch an invasion on Poland. So the Nazi invasion will begin on September 1st. The Soviet invasion will begin on September 17th. And by September 28th, Warsaw will surrender and Poland will be divided right down the middle, or pretty close to it. What I believe we all know, and if we don't know, we do now, and we're going to spend a significant amount of time with, is Hitler breaking this pact. And the pact is broken through a large scale, one of the largest military invasions in the war, land invasions, and that is known as Operation Barbarossa. This is where Hitler and the Wehrmacht will invade Nazi Germany, invade Soviet Russia. So with that, the breaking of that pact, this is where the Soviets become part of the Allies, so become part of the Allied powers. Furthermore, America gets involved because the Soviets become part of a plan we're going to talk about in the next lesson that you guys are probably familiar with from last year, the policy known as Lend-Lease. So a couple of interesting cartoons, two of my favorite actually. It says, wonder how long the honeymoon will last. It's got the marriage of Hitler and Stalin. And then the one below, if you were with me last year, you've seen this one forgive me, comrade, but I think it says the opportunity. The opportunity, but it seems such a good opportunity. So here he is stabbing Stalin in the back, Stalin dropping the Russo-German non-aggression pact, and to the right of the picture you see the Blitz, the Luftwaffe, the Panzers rushing in, and in the background in the image, it might be difficult to see, but these are reasons that the Nazis are going to break the pact. They're invading the Soviets for oil fields in the Caucasus, wheat and flour for food supply, and then obviously due to the fact that politically, socially, they're enemies because they're communists. Yeah.
Had Russia invaded Finland by this point already?
Yes, and I almost pulled that into this lesson, but the invasion of Finland deserves to stand by itself. So that's like one of the most horrific, brutal, and that's one thing I wish this book would have done. That I wish it would have done more with the Russian invasion of Finland. I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but the Russian invasion of Finland is like one of the craziest campaigns at the start of World War II. At the end of the campaign, there were hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers dead. The total of Finns dead was less than 30,000. It was a war on skis. The Finns, they launched the most insane campaign against the Russians. And if you have not read that portion of the Nazi juggernaut in the story of World War II, check that out. Just that snippet of the invasion of Finland. So we'll get into that a bit later.
Although the Russians did, because the Russians used strategically, because a lot more Russians died than did get the Karelia region. So.
Well, yeah, so they break that defensive line just with sheer numbers and mechanization. But what the Finns did was pretty impressive. So, in the story of Finland in World War II it's interesting to follow throughout the entire war because there's constant sort of, it's a pretty significant resistance, So we'll get into that a bit later. Good point, Andrew. So let's talk a little bit about the invasion of Poland. Obviously, the idea here is to allow Poland to keep its independence, and that was agreed upon in the Munich Pact. Chamberlain believed that, faced with the prospect of war against Britain and France, Hitler would stop the aggression. That's that revisionist history of Chamberlain. And I'll get you guys that podcast interview. I'll find it somewhere on this newest book that just came out not long ago. So Chamberlain is obviously wrong. Hitler, as we said before, not a man of his word. German soldiers are going to disguise themselves as Polish soldiers, and they're going to launch an attack against German-speaking Poles on the border of Prussia and Poland on August 31st, 1939 in Gleiwitz, by German speakers in here. Gleiwitz is where the attack occurred. It's known as Operation Himmler, also known as Operation Conserve or Operation Canned Goods. It's basically what is called a false flag operation. They send out all this propaganda that Polish soldiers have attacked German-speaking people, and this gives the Nazis grounds for invasion. The Nazis take control very quickly of the Polish defenses along the western border and the northwestern border. These were like heavily fortified cement bunkers. Yeah, I'll be right there. And the Soviets are going to invade on September 17th, 1939. So here's your invasion map. I decided to blow that up a little bit a little bit more for you. Hey, sorry about that. So we've got the Pensier movements. We've got the Blitz. So you've got Panzers, mechanized trucks, mechanized motorcycles and sidecars, and heavy artillery that's being pulled by trucks that are going to be set up. Not to mention the fact that you have all these defensive bunkers now that are along this area. They're controlled by the Nazis as well. I should have pulled up a picture with those bunkers. We'll take a look at that a little bit later. I'll show you what those bunkers look like. So Poland stands alone. No one comes to Poland's aid, even though the Munich Pact agreed that if there was an invasion of Poland, that military forces would mobilize and provide an alliance, i.e. Britain and France. So the Blitzkrieg in Poland was quick, ferocious, 1.5 million men, advanced artillery, roughly 2,000 tanks, more than 4,000 Nazi Luftwaffe. They put up a really tough fight. Most of their planes never got off the ground. Their defenses were held by the Nazis. Their horse-drawn cavalry was met by Nazi panzers and motorized brigades. The Poles could really only muster about 22 infantry divisions to fight. Only a few mobilized divisions with light tanks. And by September 17th, the Soviets invade from the east. Polish military officers were murdered or sent to prison camps by both the Nazis and the Soviets. That was where I was talking about the Polish cavalryman who was sent to the Lubyanka, forced to sign a confession of treason, and then sent by train and marched in shackles to Siberia, Siberian labor camp. Any idea what they made in the Siberian labor camps? Some labor camps were used for production of like some foundry production, but a lot of the Siberian camps made skis. Did somebody say that out there? So that's that particular guy, and that book's called The Long Walk, and then the movie's called The Way Back if you're interested. So Polish resistance was overrun by the Wehrmacht and the Red Army, and Poland surrendered in Warsaw on September 28, 1939. Polish civilians, Jews, Gypsies, the undesirables. This could have been people with medical disabilities, could have been people that would have identified as political dissidents, homosexuals. These groups of people were rounded up and put into labor camps, concentration camps as well. The Polish population per capita suffered more in World War II than any other country. And most of them died as a result of the Holocaust. The construction of concentration camps and labor camps in Poland began as early as 1933. And Britain and France will declare war on Germany on September 3rd. So here we have the motorized divisions on the top left, German soldiers marching in on the top right, and then this is absolutely horrific. The bodies piled on wagons, and then you can just see the amount of soldiers in occupying Poland. Just millions of soldiers marched or being mobilized into this little country. This is Polish light artillery. Light tanks, the 7TP light tanks. There are only a couple of divisions of these to battle they had more cavalry than they had tank corps. These are German troops parading through Warsaw following the invasion. And then this is where we're going to stop for today. So the Nazis failed alliance. This is Chamberlain shaking Hitler's hand at Munich. The alliance, the naval alliance and the Munich Pact failed. And it obviously, it's ultimately going to challenge Britain at the seas. We're going to talk about the Battle of Atlantic here very soon. It's actually more than a battle. It's like a massive campaign. The breaking in the Munich Pact erases the hopes that there would be cooperation and warfare would be prevented, and it ultimately leads to the start of World War II in Europe. So, what we'll do is talk about Japan and the Spanish Civil War next time.